A broke rancher took in a homeless woman to cook for him, but what she asked for in return left him speechless. Wyoming Territory, December 1879. The wind was a predator. It stalked the plains with a hungry howl, a devil unchained, hunting for any crack in the world to spill its icy fury. It was the kind of winter that turned breath to frost and men to ghosts. It clawed at the worn edges of the world, peeling back hope until only the frozen, brittle bone of survival remained. For Eliza Mayhew, survival was a dwindling candle flame in a gale. Her world had shrunk to the four thin walls of a sod-roofed cabin that was more tomb than home. The cold was a physical presence, a thief that stole the feeling from her fingers and the strength from her bones. It seeped through the mud chinking, a constant, malevolent whisper of the end. Her husband Thomas had been a man of dreams as vast as the sky and pockets as empty as a pauper's prayer. He had died 2 months prior, leaving her with nothing but his name, his debts, and a silence in the cabin that was louder than any storm. The debt belonged to Jedediah Thorne, a man whose heart was as barren as the winter ground. He had come yesterday, his eyes like chips of flint, his words like stones. He gave her until the new moon to vacate. The property he'd sneered was his now. Eliza looked at her hands, raw and chapped. They were broad hands, capable, but there was no work for them here. She was an outcast, marked by poverty and by a frame that the town's women whispered about with cruel, pinched mouths. She was a large woman, built for work and for warmth, but in their eyes she was simply too much. The last of the flour was gone. The salted pork had been a memory for a week. Hunger was a dull, constant ache in her belly, a companion to the cold. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, the wool scratchy and offering little comfort. The blizzard had descended without warning, a white curtain dropping over the world. The snow did not fall, it attacked, hurled sideways by the wind. It slapped the single greased paper window like angry fists. She knew if she stayed, she would die. The cold would take her, or the hunger would. It was a simple, brutal truth. There was one place, one last, desperate chance. The Blackwood Ranch. It lay miles to the north, a vast empire of cattle and land ruled by a ghost. Silas Blackwood, a name spoken in town with a mixture of awe and fear. He was a man of immense wealth and immense sorrow, a widower who had locked himself away after his wife's death in childbirth a year ago. He was a recluse, a legend, a shadow on his own land. To walk there in this storm was madness. It was suicide, but to stay here was a certainty of the same fate, only slower. Eliza made her choice. She wrapped her feet in burlap sacks over her worn boots, pulled on Thomas's threadbare coat, and stepped out into the howling white. The world vanished instantly. There was no sky, no ground, only a churning vortex of snow and wind that stole her breath and blinded her eyes. Every step was a battle against a force that wanted to rip her from the earth and scour her from memory. She kept her head down, her mind fixed on a single thought. North, just keep moving north. The cold sank its teeth into her, deep and sharp, a pain that went beyond flesh into the very marrow of her being. Hours bled into an eternity of white. She fell, she rose. She stumbled, she crawled. Her body screamed, but a core of stubborn life refused to be extinguished. She was a widow, an outcast, a poor, large woman nobody wanted, but she was not yet dead. Just as the last of her strength gave way, just as her vision began to tunnel into a welcoming darkness, a shape loomed out of the maelstrom. A fence. A long, dark line of fence standing defiant against the storm. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her exhaustion. She followed the fence line, her gloved hands dragging along the rough wood, her legs moving on memory alone. And then a light, a faint, golden smudge in the blizzard's fury. A lamp in a window. She collapsed against a massive wooden gate, her last ounce of will spent. She pounded a weak, frozen fist against the wood, a sound swallowed by the wind. Darkness finally claimed her, pulling her down into a silent, snow-cradled sleep. He found her there. Silas Blackwood, drawn by the frantic barking of his dog, saw the heap of snow-dusted rags by his gate. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face a mask of harsh lines and unshaven grief. He thought she was dead. Another soul claimed by the unforgiving land. He knelt, brushing the snow from her face, and felt the faintest whisper of breath against his frozen fingers. With a grunt, he lifted her. She was heavier than he expected, a solid, substantial weight against his chest. He carried her through the gate and toward the sprawling ranch house, a fortress of stone and timber that seemed as cold and forbidding as its master. Inside, the house was vast and silent. A fire roared in a stone hearth the size of a wagon, but it gave off no real warmth. It was a house without a heart, a place of echoes and memories. He laid her on a bearskin rug before the fire, his movements efficient, impersonal. He was a man accustomed to dealing with livestock, and he treated her with the same detached practicality. He sent his foreman Gus for blankets and hot water. Eliza drifted back to consciousness slowly, drawn by the feeling of warmth seeping into her frozen limbs. She smelled wood smoke and coffee. She was alive. She opened her eyes to see a man staring down at her. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, gray and stormy, and they held a sorrow so profound it seemed to have been carved into his soul. This was Silas Blackwood, the ghost of the plains. He said nothing, merely watched her with an unnerving stillness. She tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness washing over her. "Easy," his voice was a low rumble, rough like gravel. "You nearly froze solid." She looked around, taking in the grand, empty room. The stone walls, the dark wood beams, the utter lack of feminine touch. It was a place of deep and abiding loneliness. A new sound broke the silence. A thin, fretful cry from another room. A baby. Silas's jaw tightened at the sound. He turned away from her, his shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second, a crack in his stoic facade. Eliza understood, the wife who died in childbirth. The crying was his son. Her heart ached for this broken man and the motherless child. She spent 2 days recovering, kept in a small, plain room. A quiet woman who worked in the kitchen brought her meals of broth and bread. Eliza learned the woman's name was Martha, and that the wet nurse had fled the isolation and the blizzard 2 weeks ago, leaving Mr. Blackwood to manage the infant alone with tinned milk and desperation. On the 3rd day, Eliza felt her strength return. She could not be a burden. She owed this man her life, but she had nothing to pay him with. She dressed in her own worn, dry clothes and walked out of the room, seeking the master of the house. She found him in the kitchen, awkwardly trying to heat a bottle of milk over the stove while the baby, cradled in a basket nearby, wailed with a heartbreaking intensity. The room smelled of scorched milk. Eliza didn't hesitate. She walked to the basket and gently lifted the crying infant. He was small, too small, and his face was red and pinched with hunger and distress. She held him against her shoulder, her large, soft body a comfort he had clearly been denied. She began to hum, a low, soothing tune her own mother had sung to her. The baby's cries subsided into whimpers, then quieted altogether. He snuggled into the warmth of her embrace, his tiny body relaxing against hers. Silas stood frozen, staring at the scene. He watched this strange woman, this outcast he had pulled from a snowdrift, soothe his son with an ease he could neither comprehend nor replicate. For the first time in a year, the house was not filled with the sound of a crying baby. Eliza looked at him, her expression humble but direct. "He needs a woman's touch, sir." Her voice was soft but clear. Silas finally moved, turning back to the stove. "I'm aware." His tone was clipped, defensive. "I have no way to repay your kindness," she began, her gaze steady. "I have no money. The homestead I lived on is lost to me. I have nothing. But I can work." He turned to face her, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His gray eyes were unreadable. "What kind of work?" "I can cook," she said simply. "I can clean this house. It needs a heart. I can give it one. Let me earn my keep. I will cook for you, Mr. Blackwood. I will care for your son, in exchange for a roof over my head." He studied her for a long moment. He saw not just a desperate woman, but a capable one. He saw the strength in her plain face, the dignity in her posture, and he had seen the magic she worked on his son. "The boy's name is Thomas," he said, the first personal detail he had offered. A flicker of pain crossed Eliza's face at the name, her late husband's name, but she concealed it quickly. "It's a good, strong name." "You can have the room you're in," Silas stated, not as an offer but as a decree. "You'll cook for me and the men, and you'll see to the boy, we'll see how it goes." It was not a welcome but an arrangement, a practical, non-emotional agreement born of mutual necessity. For him, a solution to the chaos in his home. For her, a reprieve from death. And so, Eliza Mayhew began her new life. She rose before the sun, her presence a quiet hum in the heart of the cold, silent house. The kitchen, which had been a place of grim utility, came alive under her touch. The scent of baking bread soon filled the halls, a warm, wholesome aroma that seemed to chase the shadows from the corners. She made hearty stews that warmed the ranch hands from the inside out, pies with flaky crusts, and simple, nourishing meals for Silas that he ate in silence, his head bowed over his plate. She turned the main room from a cavernous hall into a living space. She scrubbed the floors until the wood gleamed, polished the dusty furniture, and always kept the fire burning bright and steady. She did not change the house. She simply woke it up. Silas watched her. He was a man of few words, and he observed her from a distance. He noted the efficiency of her movements, the way she wasted nothing. He saw the quiet dignity she carried, a stark contrast to the desperation that had brought her to his door. He would come in from the cold, stamping the snow from his boots, and the first thing that would greet him was the smell of her cooking and the sight of his son, Thomas, sleeping peacefully in a basket near the hearth, clean and content. Eliza, in turn, observed him. She saw the way his large hands, calloused and strong from work, were impossibly gentle when he checked on his sleeping son. She saw the deep lines of grief etched around his eyes, a pain so profound it seemed a permanent part of him. He was a man walled off from the world, encased in ice of his own making. She learned his habits. He liked his coffee black and strong. He preferred savory over sweet. He never spoke of his late wife, but Eliza would sometimes find him standing before a portrait of a beautiful, smiling woman that hung in the hallway, his expression one of utter desolation. One evening she made a simple apple crumble, a recipe her mother had taught her. She left a bowl for him on the kitchen table, still warm from the oven. She didn't know it was his late wife's favorite dessert. He found it there when he came in late. He ate the entire bowl standing in the quiet kitchen, and for a moment the ice around his heart thawed just enough to let a single, painful memory breathe. He did not thank her for it, but the next morning he left a block of fresh butter on the counter, a silent acknowledgement. Their connection was built in these silences, in small, unspoken acts. Eliza noticed his gloves were worn through at the fingertips. She spent an evening meticulously mending them with strong thread, leaving them by his plate at breakfast. He noticed her boots, the ones she'd been found in, were cracked and thin. One day, a package arrived from the mercantile in town. Inside was a pair of sturdy, fleece-lined leather boots, big enough to fit her broad feet perfectly. There was no note. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of this large, quiet woman who had appeared from nowhere, were won over by her cooking and her gentle nature. They began to tip their hats to her, to offer a quiet ma'am as she passed. She had brought a measure of peace and order to their world. Little Thomas thrived under her care. He began to gain weight, his cheeks filling out, his fretful cries replaced by happy gurgles. Eliza would sing to him for hours, her low, melodious voice filling the quiet corners of the house. Silas would often pause outside a room, listening. He had not heard singing in this house since his wife died. The sound was both a comfort and a fresh wound. It was the sound of life, and he had forgotten what that felt like. One afternoon, one of the younger ranch hands made a crude jest about Eliza's size within Silas's hearing. Silas stopped dead, his face hardening into granite. He turned and walked over to the man, his sheer presence radiating a cold fury. "Eliza Mayhew is the woman who runs my home and cares for my son," Silas said, his voice dangerously low. "You will speak of her with respect, or you will find yourself walking off my land. Do you understand?" The hand, pale and stammering, nodded vigorously. The message was clear to all. She was under his protection. Eliza heard of the incident from Gus, the foreman, and a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. It was the first time someone had defended her, had seen her as a person worthy of respect. But the fragile peace of their isolated world could not last. The blizzard eventually broke, and the roads to town became passable once more. Supplies were running low, and Silas knew he had to make the trip. He was hesitant to leave Eliza and the baby alone, but he was more hesitant to take them with him. The town of Redemption was a place of sharp tongues and long memories. "I should come," Eliza said, her tone firm. "Thomas needs things. And I know what the kitchen is lacking." He looked at her, then at his son, and knew she was right. He gave a curt nod. "Be ready at dawn." They rode in the large sleigh, Silas at the reins, Eliza beside him with Thomas bundled securely in her arms. The air was crisp and cold, the world blanketed in a pristine, glittering white. It was beautiful, but Eliza felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. Redemption was just as she remembered. A single muddy street lined with false-fronted buildings. As their sleigh pulled up to the mercantile, heads turned, windows parted. The whispering started almost immediately. It followed them into the store, a current of malice that prickled the back of Eliza's neck. She saw the looks. The women staring at her plain dress and her full figure, then glancing at the handsome, wealthy Silas Blackwood, their faces a mixture of envy and contempt. They saw a grieving widower and a grasping, unattractive opportunist. Eliza kept her head high, focusing on her list, her movements calm and deliberate. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her shame. She gathered flour, sugar, and tins of peaches, her manner all business. Silas felt the stares too. A muscle worked in his jaw. He had lived in isolation for so long he had forgotten the petty cruelties of other people. He felt a surge of protective anger, a feeling that was foreign and startlingly fierce. Then the bell above the door chimed, and the world went cold. Jedediah Thorne stepped inside, his smile a predatory slash across his face. His eyes landed on Eliza, and his smile widened. "Well, well, Eliza Mayhew, I see you've landed on your feet, and on your back from the looks of it." The store went silent. The whispers died, replaced by a thick, expectant hush. Everyone turned to watch the unfolding drama. Eliza froze, the blood draining from her face. Thomas, sensing her distress, began to fuss in her arms. "That's enough, Thorne," Silas's voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. Thorne ignored him, his gaze fixed on Eliza, enjoying her humiliation. "Still owe me a considerable debt, my dear, a debt of honor, though I suppose a woman like you wouldn't know much about that." He gestured from her to Silas. "Found a new way to pay your bills, have you? Spreading your ample charms for the grieving rancher." The insult, so public and so vile, struck Eliza like a physical blow. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not here, not in front of him. "You will leave her alone," Silas said, stepping between Thorne and Eliza, his body a solid wall of fury. Thorne laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "Protecting your new property, Blackwood. Be careful, she's used goods, and she still belongs to me until her husband's debt is paid in full. That's the law." He was baiting him, trying to provoke a fight, to further ruin Eliza's reputation and assert his own power. Silas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to smash the smug look off Thorne's face. But he knew that violence would only give credence to the rumors, would only harm Eliza more. Instead, he turned to the storekeeper. "Put Mr. Thorne's purchases on my account," he said, his voice ringing with authority. Then he looked at Thorne, his eyes like chips of ice. "And add a charge for the debt he claims Eliza Mayhew owes him. Whatever the amount, it is paid." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick roll of bills, and threw it on the counter. "For the inconvenience." Without another word, he took the basket of supplies from Eliza's nerveless hand, placed a firm hand on the small of her back, and guided her out of the store, leaving Jedediah Thorne standing amidst a silent, stunned crowd. The ride back to the ranch was a long, cold silence. Eliza stared straight ahead, her face a pale, still mask, but inside she was crumbling. The public humiliation had flayed her open, exposing all her deepest insecurities. Thorne's words echoed in her mind: used goods, ample charms. Silas drove the sleigh with a grim intensity, the fury still radiating from him in waves. He was angry at Thorn, angry at the town, angry at a world that could be so cruel. When they reached the ranch, Eliza went immediately to the kitchen, moving on autopilot. She put away the supplies, her movements stiff and jerky. She needed the comfort of work, the familiarity of a simple task. Silas watched her for a moment from the doorway, then went to the main room and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He brought one to her, pressing it into her cold hand. "Drink this." It was an order, not a suggestion. She took a sip, the fiery liquid a shock to her system. She looked up at him, and the dam of her control finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "He made me feel so dirty. So worthless." "You are not worthless," Silas said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. That night, after the baby was asleep and the house was wrapped in a profound quiet, they sat by the fire. The space between them crackled with unspoken things. Eliza finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Thomas, my husband, he wasn't a bad man, just a dreamer. He wanted to build a paradise for me, but he built it on borrowed money from a snake. When he died, the paradise became my prison. Thorn held the debt over me. He suggested other ways I could pay, ways a widow could earn her keep. The shame and fear she had held inside for so long poured out of her. I ran. That's why I came out in the storm. I was running from him. I would have rather frozen to death than—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Silas listened, his expression grim. The pieces clicked into place, her desperation, her fierce dignity. He looked at this woman who had faced down death and degradation and felt a profound, aching respect. "He will never touch you again," Silas vowed, his voice a raw promise. "I will not allow it." Moved by her confession, a wall inside him crumbled. He found himself speaking of things he had locked away for a year. "My wife, her name was Elena." He spoke the name as if it were a fragile, precious thing. "She was like sunshine. She filled this house with light and laughter. I thought our life would be perfect." His voice grew thick with pain. "The birth was hard," the doctor said. "There were complications. He said I had to choose, the baby or her. Elena, she made the choice for me. She told me to save our son. I held her hand as she left. My last memory of her is her begging me to protect our child." He stared into the flames, his eyes seeing a past he could not escape. "I failed her. I couldn't even stand to look at Thomas. Every time I saw him, I saw her sacrifice. I saw my failure. I shut down. The house went cold. My son was being raised by strangers. Until you came." He turned to look at her, his stormy eyes filled with a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "You brought this house back to life, Eliza. You saved my son. In many ways, you saved me." In that quiet, firelit room, they were no longer a master and a servant, a recluse and an outcast. They were 2 broken people sharing the shattered pieces of their souls. Eliza reached out, her hand tentatively covering his. Her touch was warm, steady. "You are not a failure, Silas. You are a man who has known great sorrow." "There is no shame in that." He looked down at her broad, capable hand covering his. It felt right, it felt like an anchor in a storm. He made a decision then, a decision that was both practical and deeply, profoundly emotional. "Thorn called you my property. He was wrong. But he was right about one thing. The law is a weapon he will try to use against you." He took a deep breath. "There is a way to protect you. A way to make sure he can never lay a claim on you again. To give you my name." Eliza pulled her hand back as if burned. She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Marry you." "Sir, you can't be serious." A sad, self-deprecating smile touched her lips. "No one marries a fat girl, sir, especially not a man like you. Men marry for beauty, for status, not for this." She gestured to her own ample form. "I am not other men," Silas said, his voice firm, cutting through her painful words. "I have seen what beauty and status get you. A life of whispers and shallow hearts like the people in that town. I am done with that." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I see what is real, Eliza. I see your strength. I see your kindness. I see the way you healed my son and my home." That is a beauty more rare and more valuable than any pretty face. He stood up, pacing before the fire. This would be a marriage of convenience, a partnership, to protect you, to give Thomas a mother, to give my life some semblance of order. Nothing more would be expected. But as he said the words, he knew it was a lie. He already wanted more. He wanted this woman's warmth, her steadiness, her quiet strength, to be a permanent part of his life. "This is your home now, Eliza," he said, his voice softening. "You and the boy, you are family. A piece of paper will just make it official in the eyes of the world. It will make you untouchable." His reply, so different from what she expected, stripped away her defenses. He wasn't offering pity, he was offering respect, a shield, a home, a family, everything she had ever wanted. Tears streamed down her face now, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of disbelief, of a hope she thought had long been extinguished. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, I will." "Silas," he corrected her gently. "My name is Silas." They were married a week later by a traveling preacher. A quiet ceremony in the main room of the ranch house with Gus and Martha as witnesses. Eliza wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself. Silas stood beside her, tall and solemn, his words a firm, unwavering vow. But Jedediah Thorne was not a man to be thwarted. Humiliated and enraged by Silas paying the debt, his festering greed and malice sought a new outlet. He could no longer claim Eliza through debt, so he decided to destroy her reputation, and with it, Silas's standing. He arrived at the ranch 2 weeks after the wedding, not alone. He brought with him the county sheriff, a weaselly man whose loyalty was easily purchased, and 2 hired thugs who looked more like wolves than men. They rode into the yard, kicking up dust and shouting for Silas. "Blackwood, come out here, we have a legal matter to discuss." Silas and Gus emerged onto the porch, Silas's face a thundercloud. Eliza watched from the window, her heart pounding against her ribs, little Thomas held tight in her arms. "What do you want, Thorne?" Silas's voice was a low growl. Thorne smirked, holding up a piece of paper. "I have here a warrant signed by the judge, a morals complaint filed by concerned citizens of redemption. It claims you are harboring a woman of low character, a debtor and a vagrant, and that your marriage is a sham meant to conceal an illicit arrangement." The bought sheriff stepped forward nervously. "The law requires us to investigate, Mr. Blackwood. We have to question the woman." It was a blatant attack, a legal maneuver designed to humiliate and intimidate. Thorne's plan was to drag Eliza back to town, to put her through a sham hearing where he could slander her name without consequence, and perhaps even have the marriage annulled, leaving her vulnerable once more. "You will not set one foot inside my house," Silas said, his voice deadly calm. His ranch hands, drawn by the commotion, began to gather behind him, their faces hard, their loyalty to the man and the woman who fed them unquestionable. "Now see here, Blackwood," the sheriff blustered, "this is official county business." "This is my land," Silas countered, taking a step forward. "And that is my wife. Your business ends at my gate." Just then, the front door opened. Eliza stepped out onto the porch, her face pale but her eyes clear and steady. She handed the baby to a waiting Martha and walked to stand beside Silas. She would not hide. She would not let him fight this battle for her. They would fight it together. She looked directly at Thorne, her voice ringing with a moral clarity that cut through his blustering threats. "You are a liar, Jedediah Thorne. You prey on the weak and the grieving. You tried to use my husband's death to trap me, and when I refused you, you sought to destroy me. But you have failed." She then turned her gaze to the sheriff. "And you, sir, you shame your badge by serving a man with no honor. There is no crime here. The only crime was the cruelty and greed in that man's heart." Her simple, powerful honesty was a far more effective weapon than any threat. The hired thugs shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff avoided her gaze. Even the ranch hands stood a little taller, their belief in her solidified. Thorne, seeing his plan unraveling, grew desperate. "She's a witch. She seduced him. Look at her." What man would marry that unless he was under some kind of spell? Silas had heard enough. In 2 long strides, he was off the porch. He grabbed Thorn by the front of his coat, lifting him effortlessly off his feet. "You have slandered my wife for the last time," he snarled, his face inches from Thorn's. "Her worth is greater than you could ever comprehend. Now get off my land before I forget I'm a civilized man." He threw Thorn to the ground. The man landed in a heap in the dusty yard. Humiliated and utterly defeated, Thorn scrambled to his feet, shot one last look of pure hatred at Eliza and Silas, and fled, his hired men and the cowardly sheriff trailing behind him like beaten dogs. Silence descended on the yard. The threat was gone. Silas turned back to Eliza, his chest heaving. He walked up the steps and stood before her. Without a word, he gently cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss in front of all his men, sealing their partnership not with a legal document but with a public declaration of his heart. The marriage of convenience was over. A real marriage had begun. In the weeks that followed, the last of the ice around Silas's heart melted away. The house, already woken by Eliza's presence, was now truly filled with life. Laughter became a common sound. They began to build a new life, not on the ashes of the old, but on a new foundation of respect and burgeoning love. They rejected the values of the gossiping town and the ghost-filled past. Eliza, with Silas's blessing, started a small garden near the house. He watched her, a strange feeling swelling in his chest as she knelt in the rich soil, her broad hands planting seeds of carrots and peas. She was planting roots for them, for their family. He, in turn, began to share his world with her. He took her out on the range, teaching her about the cattle, the land, the rhythms of the ranch. She was a quick learner, her practical mind grasping the complexities of his empire. She was not just his wife, she was his partner. Their evenings were spent by the fire, not in silence, but in comfortable conversation. They talked of their dreams for the ranch, for Thomas. The physical space between them on the settee grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. One day, Silas took her to a small, quiet hill behind the house. A simple wooden cross marked a grave. Eleanor's. Eliza stood back respectfully, giving him his space. Silas knelt by the grave, touching the weathered wood. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "I brought someone to meet you. This is Eliza, she saved us, me and Thomas. She brought the sun back, I think you would have liked her." It was a release, a final, symbolic act of healing. He was not replacing his past, but honoring it while embracing his future. He stood up and took Eliza's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They walked back to the house together, leaving the ghosts to rest in peace. That spring, as the first green shoots pushed through the soil in Eliza's garden, she told Silas she was pregnant. The joy on his face was pure and unshadowed, a sunrise after a long, dark night. 3 years passed. The Blackwood Ranch thrived not just in cattle but in life. It was no longer a place of sorrow, but a beacon of warmth and family on the vast, open plains. A visitor to the ranch would find a sprawling, welcoming home. The sound of children's laughter would spill from the open doors. Young Thomas, now a sturdy, happy boy, chasing after his little sister, a girl with her mother's kind eyes and her father's determined spirit. They would see Eliza, no longer the shunned widow, but the confident, respected matriarch of the Blackwood clan. Her figure was still full, her face still plain by the world's standards, but it shone with a deep, abiding happiness. She moved with purpose and grace, the undisputed heart of the home. They would see Silas, the lines of grief on his face softened into laugh lines. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, contented love as he watched his wife and children. He was no longer a ghost on his own land, but a king in his own kingdom, a kingdom built not of fences and cattle, but of love and family. One warm summer evening, they sat together on the porch swing Silas had built, watching the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Thomas and little Sarah played in the yard, their shrieks of joy the only sound in the peaceful twilight. Eliza leaned her head on Silas's shoulder, a comfortable, familiar gesture. "Do you remember the day I first came here?" she asked softly. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I remember a woman who looked like a drowned kitten but had the fight of a grizzly bear." He smiled. I remember the best decision I ever made was opening that gate." She looked up at him, her love for him shining in her eyes. "You saw something in me no one else bothered to look for." "I saw a home," he said simply, kissing the top of her head. "I saw everything I had been missing." In the harsh and unforgiving land of the West, they had found their salvation in the most unlikely of places. They had proven that a family is not defined by blood or by law, but by the stubborn, resilient bonds of love forged in the fires of hardship. Their story became a quiet legend, a testament to the truth that true worth is not measured by outward appearance or worldly wealth, but by the strength and beauty of the human heart. It was a story of redemption, a story of acceptance, and a story of how two broken souls, cast out by the world, could come together to build a love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky itself.